Great to see so many people back together. My name is Marco. I'll be moderating it today, and we're going to be doing things slightly differently today. But before we get started, just a little bit about the history, how we got together. So many years ago, Jenny Blackburn from then Salesforce approached Rajan from LinkedIn, myself, a couple other people, and basically said, hey, there's a lack of community for people like us. And we're like, well, what do you mean like us? And so basically her observation was that there's not the technical learning and development in technology companies or for technical folks tends to be slightly different. Like it's not the traditional L&D. And she's basically suggested, let's get together and share how we do things intimately with one another. And so we did that, and then the group was called TechLearn. And then in 2018, we got together again and said, hey, why don't we create an annual gathering? And so we did that in 2018 at LinkedIn for the first time, and had 100+ people show up from basically who's who of Silicon Valley, L&D. And then the following year, we had the same thing at Twitter, 2019, so last year, and it was pretty awesome as well. Amazing speakers, great knowledge sharing among ourselves. Got to meet our tribe essentially. So it was wonderful. And then 2020, we were planning to do the annual again, but then COVID happened, and we said, hey, why don't we move this to online, to the Zoom experience, try it out in a form of a roundtable. So here's us again back on a monthly basis. So that's kind of how we came about. So really quickly, we have a couple of community guidelines. So again, this is a community for us, by us. So we sort of try to keep it a safe place. And the objective is to be that safe place where we learn and get inspired from one another. So, be kind, open-minded, share yourself, respect people's privacy. Generally, there's no non-solicitation policy, so do not pitch things. We're here to learn. We have a little bit of a governance board. We came up with this slide essentially, and it's Katie from Twitter, John from LinkedIn, Chris from Microsoft, me, and Andrew from Shopify. And this is the link to the details. So with that, we're gonna move to our second speaker. It's Rebecca from Expedia Group. And so Rebecca's gonna talk about scaling Train the Trainer program. And so the significance of this is we've talked in past couple of months a lot about peer learning and how we had Twitter as a guest speaker where they talked about how they scaled their program. And so Expedia is doing that and focusing mostly on how do you enable engineers to stand up and teach other engineers. What's the process of doing that? So with that, I'd love to introduce Rebecca, and I'll pass the microphone or the screen to you.
Yep, thanks, Marco. All right. So, make sure. All right, just a thumbs up if you can see it. Yep, okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, so very quickly, it's really good to be here. Thank you for having me. I am a learning architect at Expedia Group, and which I'm super excited, by the way, by that title. I still kind of get a giggle out of that, so kind of fun. So with my introduction very quickly, I was 12 years in the high school classroom, so I was a history teacher and a competitive debate coach. I was 5 years in an LMS implementation company. It was actually Scantron, but I was doing their LMS implementation. And then I've been almost 7 years at Expedia Group in both technical and non-technical roles. I am currently living northwest of Seattle on Camino Island, which I love. So working from home has been a blessing. I'm very grateful. So the challenge at Expedia Group. What's interesting is we have, I think it's over 6,000 now. I think over 6,000 software developers spread around the world. There are about 20 brands that we have within Expedia Group with different tech stacks, multiple stacks even within those same brands. Obviously, there's ever-changing technologies and frameworks and so forth. And the centralized learning and development team does not specialize in tech training. So very quickly here, the history, because I really want to get to the meat of this. So the history is back in 2015, I started what was called the Expedia Code Academy. The purpose was multifold. First, we wanted to get people who did not understand technology or who were not engineers, we wanted to give them an opportunity to learn about coding. And so we started this program with one class. It quickly exploded to 9 countries very, very quickly, and with a ton of classes happening. And this is just engineers teaching whatever they wanted to teach. Well, it became very apparent that they were struggling with putting together their content, and so they needed help. And at this point, I was not in a learning and development role. I was in a more technical role at the time, and I saw them struggling. This is just a side project of mine, but I saw them struggling. And so eventually I was like, oh my goodness, I really need to help support them. And so I did some work around an instructor workshop that was about a 3-hour session. Lots of people joined in on that. And then eventually last year, I joined in an L&D team. There were only 3 of us, but it was really fun to have people around me who were like-minded. And then it eventually, this Expedia instructor workshop expanded into the Expedia Group Instructor Academy. So going from 3 hours of instruction to 12 hours of instruction. And it's made a huge difference, by the way. And now in 2020, we've had 3 of our learning and development teams come together, and we're focusing on engineering and product merging. All right, so let me give you kind of the story of the Instructor Academy. I will not be reading this entire slide, I promise. So in thinking about assisting our engineers in becoming teachers, I went back to my roots as a teacher and realized, wow, there really is a lot of information that I learned in teaching school that would probably be really helpful. And so I thought, well, you know, it's going to be a 12-hour program. This is a lot of investment of time. Maybe we should make this into a certification program. So that's what we did. So what we did was I started to put together what are those essential skills that make for an effective teacher. So I went to the Danielson Framework. Any of you who come out of K-12 education may be familiar with this framework. It's called the Danielson Framework, and what it does is it gives a set of dimensions or domains of competency for every educator K through 12. And it also gives a rubric for all of those. And I'll show you those in the next coming slides so that you can kind of see that. You can Google Danielson Framework and you'll get a ton of hits and resources. There is one particular one that is a website. So what I did was I took those concepts and I kind of modified them for adult learning and teaching. So of course they're geared towards the K-12 population. So this was really, I needed to change it up a little bit. Then I started thinking about what all of that meant. I created this, I put together this rubric based upon the Danielson model and started thinking about how much time it was going to take to teach this. Originally, it was about, I thought it was going to take about 6 classes of 3 hours each. So I thought, wow, I should probably, you know, figure out how to distribute this out a little further. So because we all are under time crunches with work, especially now with COVID at Expedia, we're super busy. And so I thought, okay, let's spread that out over 6 months. But once I started putting all of the content together, I realized, wow, this is probably way too much. So I cut it down to 4 months. So 4 classes of 3 hours each. And then over time, we ended up advertising the program. I only advertised it to engineering groups around Expedia, had 213 people initially sign up. It absolutely blew my mind. I could not believe this is just voluntary. So I ended up splitting them up into 2 cohorts and for all of the regions of the world. And so anyway, this week is the culmination of cohort 2. So we've just finished up all 4 classes for cohort 1 and 2. We ended with about 132 students and about 80 of them are pursuing certification. So let me share with you the Danielson Framework. So I know this is a little blurry and I apologize, but I just wanted to give you the visual because when you go to Google and start looking it up, you'll know what I'm talking about here. So it's pretty easy to find. So there are 4 domains. So planning and preparation, the classroom environment, which is really different now, obviously, with a virtual classroom, professional responsibilities, and then instruction. Quite a few of these don't fit adult learning in the corporate setting. So obviously I took some of those away and so forth, but this is the Danielson Framework, and it gives these kind of areas of competency. And then what's really nice about the Danielson Framework is that they created a rubric. And so in this case, they labeled their categories, or excuse me, their levels as ineffective, developing, effective, and highly effective. I didn't like that. I wanted a kind of beginner, approaching, proficient, mastery, a little bit more positive, I think. And I used the basic tenets of each one of these. So I was not reinventing the wheel by any means, using what was out there and the resources that were there. So we have a solid framework for all of my students, I call them my students, all of our engineers, to focus on. So then what we do is basically for the end project, after the classes are over, for those people who want to go after the certification, we give them this project. And the project says, basically read through, look at what proficiency is, which by the way is the effective level here. So the third level is what we're considering proficiency. So I said, look at that proficiency column on the rubric, start preparing your curriculum, which is, as all of you know, is much more than content. Teach the class, record it, gather all of the other evidence that you need, like communication with your students and so forth. Put all of that together, zip it over to me. I take a look at it. Once I look, I'm not scoring it at that point. I set up a one-on-one meeting with each one of those folks. We go over it and we score their proficiency together. And then obviously a celebration of certification. So I am starting to get some of these projects in now, which is super exciting to me to see. And I'll tell you, it's amazing to see the difference in the quality of the content that's being, the curriculum that's being produced now, because they know how to do it. So I wanted to end the quick presentation here with the resources that I used. These are 4 books that I think are invaluable to everyone. First of all, I chose the Nick Shackleton-Jones book, How People Learn, as the textbook. I did not have them read every single chapter. If you've not read that, I feel like it really flips learning and development on its head a little bit. It's kind of controversial. It's fun to read, very insightful and so forth. I'm kind of turned into kind of Nick Shackleton-Jones groupie on LinkedIn a little bit. And then Teaching at Its Best was my next resource. That's a fantastic resource that gives a lot of information. Training from the Back of the Room. This is kind of my, I feel very connected in my soul to this whole idea of training from the back of the room. And then obviously the use of Bloom's taxonomy in the classroom. I do focus the sessions a lot on Bloom's. In fact, we talked about Bloom's in every single class session multiple times because it really helps in framing up how to build those your training programs. So now we have 132 people who are fully equipped to be able to go out there and do the training for us. There is no way that we can keep up as a team of, I think we have 13 people on our team. There's no way we can keep up with the amount of content that's going out to our 6,000 engineers, but this allows us to scale. This is how we're scaling. So with that many people now, we can really begin to scale. I will probably be conducting another cohort here very soon. I have quite a few people who've said, hey, I couldn't make it the first time. I want to really pick up and do this. So we'll see. So this is how Expedia is doing it. So that's about the end of the presentation. And so any questions?
Thank you, Rebecca. This is awesome. I love how you took something from like how kids learn, and then you simplified that even further, and then that worked for engineers. So yeah, that's how much brain space we have left, I guess.
Oh, I would definitely not say that, but I will tell you that if you fully understand Bloom's, and if you've studied Bloom's over time, you probably remember the first time you learned it, it might have blown your mind, right? And that's the feedback that I'm getting from a lot of the engineers saying, oh my gosh, like this is going to change how I even conduct my meetings. Now I'm realizing that there's much more. No wonder people were not understanding. So, yeah,
that was my realization when I was at Twitter as well. That we naturally want to share ourselves. We just need to be given a little bit of a framework and some hand holding, but there's innate desire to share knowledge with one another, and speaking as engineers. So
Right.
that's awesome to see that you notice the same.
Right.
All right, so we had a couple of questions. John was asking, how much time do you dedicate toward one-on-one debriefs?
Yeah, so I'm doing 90 minutes, which is a lot. It's a lot of people, and I'm one person right now. We're in the midst of training my teammates on how to teach this, so it won't be just the burden be on me. But it's about a 90-minute debrief because we're going through the content and we are discussing exactly like, here is your evidence for this proficiency. And my question to them is, where do you think you are on this rubric? Right? So it's really more of a conversation. So it does take some time.
Got it. And to kind of like riff off of that, Chris is asking, does anybody review this material? How do they know how much help or support do they get in delivering this material?
Yeah, so really great question. So when it comes to the specific content, at this point, what I have told people is the best way to identify the content is to identify the problem statement that you're even seeing on your teams. So what we're finding is engineers are saying, wow, code quality is kind of an issue. And so we need to figure out how to train our people on best practices, right? So they identify those problem statements. We also have strategic initiatives around Expedia, different like focus areas that we're kind of, pushing people towards if they're a little undecided on what they want to teach. And then also we do content reviews. So our team will sit with people as they finish their content. We go through that content with them, helping them add activities and more interaction as much as we can. Also assisting them with their intros and conclusions and even their learning outcomes if they need assistance with that. And then some of our engineers are kind of perfectionists. And so right now, for example, I have one that I have a standing meeting with. So every week we meet for about 45 minutes to an hour because he's a little more needy, and that's okay because the content that he's creating is super valuable. So.
Got it. And then to kind of add to that, Paul has this question of like research certification. So in other words, is there like a feedback loop? So you certified somebody, you trained them, you provided hand-holding, now they're teaching. How do you know that over time they're still performing well? How do you know like where you need to go and double click and help more?
Yeah, great question. So it's not something that I have fully thought through because we just finished the classes, but it's absolutely on my radar. And what I'm thinking right now is that, first of all, we have what's called a skills framework where that we're building right now. And so what's happening is each one of these classes is based upon the skills that people need to have in certain roles around the company. And so with the rubric that we build, we're able to see where people start out before a training and where they finish, right? So after the training finishes. So one of the ways that we know our instructors are effective is if we're seeing growth in the people who are attending their sessions. So if we notice at some point that those scores are kind of going down or there's not as much growth as we're seeing, that's one of the ideas that I have around that, where we can give some extra like follow-up sessions with them just to remind them of where their strengths or weaknesses may be. So that's kind of what's in my head. Again, not fully planned out yet. So we're not sure.
Yeah. So you do, but you do have some feedback mechanism that's based on data, even if it's just butts and seats, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
Got it. And so Kate is asking interesting questions like, well, this is great. This is about how you enable people to teach, but how do you know which people should be teaching what?
Right.
And I remember your earlier comment when you were doing the Code Academy. You basically said, well, we let people teach whatever they want to teach, and the magic emerged out of that.
Right.
Is that still what you're applying? So teach whatever and we'll see what sticks, or do you more intentionally tap people on the shoulder and say you should be sharing yourself because
I think it's both, right? We definitely want our instructors to teach what they're passionate about, right? So if there's a true problem that they identify, let's teach it, right? So we open that up and allow them to teach what they want to teach based upon those problem statements. But now look at this crew of people. We have over 100 people that we can now pull. If we know just a little bit about them, which now I do because we've spent so much time together, we can pull them and say, hey, we have a need for developing a class in this particular subject area. Can you help us? And we know that they're trained. So we're able to tap in. So as priorities change and so forth around the company, we can go and seek them out, even if they haven't been teaching for a while. So again, still fairly new. So we're kind of in a new territory here.
Got it. And so Stuart has this question about, you know, how much time or commitment is it for L&D person, right? And like, if you think traditionally, you know, as L&D people, we create content, like, you know, that's what we do, but now we're enabling others. So as opposed to being doers, we're enablers. So, so what's the mix? What's the you know, how much time do you enable others versus create content and own?
Yeah, so I have never been a content creator for engineering, ever. So my complete job has always been enabling our engineers, whether it's with the workshops or whether it's actually with the academy. Now, doing this process, if you have this many people sign up, I thought maybe I'd get 20 or maybe 20 or 30 people to sign up. When it was over 200, that was, whoa, that was overwhelming. So it really did become a huge portion of my job. So during a month, it ended up being probably about half of my job in a month, just teaching the classes, preparing all the materials and so forth. But now that all of the content is done, a class is 3 hours long, there's 4 classes, right? The big follow-up is, that's where some of the time consuming part comes in, though, is actually going through all of those projects, right? So actually scoring them with the folks. It's not even half my time at this point. So probably a quarter now that everything is prepared. So the preparation took a long time.
And just the last question from Jasmine, she's asking about how is this relevant to like online remote first learning versus in person. Certification tends to be easier in person than for remote.
Right. Well, what's nice about this is we don't have to worry about cameras in the classroom to record a person teaching in the class. We use Blue Jeans instead of Zoom, and so we can record those sessions, and it makes it really simple for them to package up their digital portfolio. So let me make sure that I'm getting the question though. Hang on. Yeah. So teaching online. So our team. So Erica, who's also on the call, assists us with this. She assists people with the tools that they can use to enhance their classroom, whatever the case may be with virtual. So although most of our folks are used to that in person, it's absolutely not necessary anymore with all of the tools that we have. We use an assortment of different tools for engagement. So, and I teach that during the program too, and we talk about that quite a bit.
Cool, cool. Excellent. Well, thank you, Rebecca. Super informative. And I love how you approaching that. Very studiously figuring out how to train the trainers and scale that. So thank you for sharing.